thank you for coming. We do have a quorum now, and we got one thing we got to get out of the way real quickly is adopt our rules for the next 2 years for this committee, and then we're going to have a hearing, no vote or anything, but just a hearing from DCA on some subjects matter that's in your file, and thank you DCA for coming. And at this time I'll accept a motion on the rules. We got a motion and a second. All in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed? And so the rules pass. Thank you so very much. And I appreciate a couple of you coming to get that out of the way. And I'll tell you this, there may be a few of us here, but we're going to be the most educated people in this capital when it comes to DCA. And the rest of them are going to wish they'd have been here, right? But I know. And, hey, it will be archived, so all right. All right. With that, our speaker from DCA, Mr. Rusty Haywood. And Rusty, thank you so much for coming. And I understand the commissioner had planned to come, but he's got other things. But we know he sent the knowledge. So with that, we'll give you the floor.
He sent me, Mr. Chairman. He apologizes for his inability to be here. He got called to another meeting at the same time, and somehow that happens this time of year around here. But he did send his regrets. The chairman had asked us to come to you and talk about a couple of programs that we have at the department that we either administer or that we touch indirectly. And we'll talk through those. I'm happy to take questions from members of the committee, Mr. Chairman, and we'll discuss these five programs, actually, because there's a little split in the way we're going to talk about one of them. And hopefully this will give you a little bit of information about what we're doing and how communities across the state can be impacted by some programs that are on the books. Back in 2017, our then Commissioner, Camila Knowles, was very instrumental in getting a piece of legislation passed that created rural zones across the state. These rural zones were designed to provide a leg up to communities, specifically the downtowns, that have seen better days. We've got those all across the state, and these downtowns needed a little incentive to ensure that the communities and the businesses there were having the opportunity to thrive. So this piece of legislation was passed by the legislature, signed into law by the governor, and in 2018 we had the first year of communities that were designated as rural zone communities. A couple of program requirements for those. The communities had to be no more than 15,000 people. So we're talking about the smaller communities across the state. What we were looking for was that core central business district, the historic downtown area. So there had to be a concentration of buildings that were at least 50 years old in this area. They're in downtowns all across the state. So it wasn't too hard to find those communities that did have this concentration. And there had to be a little legwork that the communities did. They had to create a master plan that said, this is what our vision is for our community. And they also had to do some market analysis to figure out what was lacking in these downtown areas. So it wasn't as if they could just come in and apply and get an immediate designation. They had to do a little bit of legwork on their end. And as part of that process where they were creating the plan, they had to identify the distress that was causing the downtown to suffer, whether that be blight, whether that be vacancy rates, whether that be poverty rates of the folks that were in there. So those 5 criteria were pooled together to create the application process for the rural zone communities. These rural zone communities were capped at no more than 10 each year. So Department of Community Affairs and Department of Economic Development jointly sit down and walk through these after the applications come in. And in the first 2 years, for 2018 and now in 2019, we designated 9 communities each year. So there were 9 scattered all across the state that have been designated, and it's a 5-year designation. Within this 5-year designation, there are 3 layers of tax credits that are available to either investors or to businesses within the community. But the foundational point is that job creation has to occur. If you take a step back and you look at the other job tax credit programs that we do have across the state, some of the challenges that are experienced in downtown in qualifying for those are the requirements that you have to have full-time employees with our regular job tax credit program. This has full-time equivalents. Our other tax credit programs have an insurance requirement that's associated with this. And one thing that I failed to mention was in the regular job tax credit program, there are certain sectors that are eligible and certain sectors that are not eligible. Within the rural zone program, you have to have the 2 net new jobs that are created in the downtown area. So that makes it far easier for folks to qualify, specifically when we're talking about full-time equivalents as opposed to full-time employees. Those credits are $2,000 a job per year for up to 5 years. And this is a tremendous incentive for those businesses that are locating or expanding into your downtown areas. It's the same credit whether you're new or existing. That does not matter. The only requirement is that these are new jobs that are being created. You can't move them from one place to another. They can't be jobs that are currently on the payrolls. They have to be new jobs within the state. On top of that, there are 2 potential credits that are available to investors. And these investors could be the same people that are creating the businesses, or it could be someone else. The first is to acquire the property in the downtown area. This investment credit is equal to 25% of that purchase price, but that's capped at $125,000. What happens is that $125,000 is spread over a 5-year period. So if you go in and you buy a property for $1 million, you're still capped at that $125,000, and you get a $25,000 credit each year over 5 years, assuming you've got that tax liability. Once you buy the building, you've probably got to do something with it. If it's a vacant downtown building, you've got to rehab the structure. So there are credits that are available for the rehabilitation of the structure. That's equal to 30% of the rehab costs. That does get capped at $150,000. That's $50,000 a year over 3 years. So one of the credits is spread over 3 years. The other 2 are spread over 5 years. But these can be layered, assuming you meet all the criteria, number one, and number two, that you do have those jobs being created. So those put together, we've got 18 communities across the state that are designated as rural zones. Beginning in 2018, I'm going to read off the 9 communities that were designated just so you know who those were. Those were Bainbridge, Commerce, Cornelia, Fitzgerald, Jonesboro, Nashville, Perry, Springfield, and Toccoa. So we got dispersion north and south, east and west. And in 2019, we had 9 new communities. These all met the criteria, the 15,000 person threshold, the 50-year-old building concentration, the planning elements that the communities did, and the blight. Avondale Estates, Greensboro, Hartwell, Hogansville, Jessup, Locust Grove, Monticello, Sylvester, and Waycross. So these are, again, dispersed across the state. We had more applicants than we did have designations. So there were these 18 communities that kind of set the bar a little higher for themselves, and they had good plans about what was going to transpire in the communities and how that was going to benefit them in the long run. I will say that it's very early for the 2019 communities because the investment and the job creation began on January 1st. Of course, we're only, 5 weeks into the year at this point, so really early to see the successes in those communities. But if we go back to the 2018 communities, we've gotten tremendous success in several of these communities. Some, it's going to take a little bit of time to get the ball rolling, but some came right out of the chute. And for instance, Bainbridge has really hit the ball out of the park. Within the first handful of months, they had several dozen buildings in the downtown area that had been acquired. They had multiple businesses that had started going into these locations. So it appeared to be pent-up demand for something to really get the fire started in the downtown area. And we've seen that in multiple communities, but I think at this point that's the one who has seen the greatest benefit in the rural zone program. So what we are doing to make sure that folks are aware of this, we are going around the state in the spring, and we're holding multiple workshops for communities who are interested to make sure they understand what we're looking for, how to go about doing it, and ensure that they have all the knowledge that they need in order to make application and be ready to make application whenever that cycle opens up over the summer. When we get to late summer, we will have applications that are due to us, and we'll have a panel of 4 or 5 people review these, score these, rank them, and then sit down with the commissioners of Community Affairs and Economic Development, talk through the rankings, and then move forward with designations for the year beginning January 1 of 2020. So that's the Rural Zone program in a nutshell. Mr. Chairman, I don't know if you want to take questions at the end or if you want to go program by program. I'll defer to you.
I think we'd like to go program by program because they might all run together here in a few minutes. But thank you very much for that presentation. And I got a couple questions myself, if you don't mind. A lot of times these programs seem to be so difficult, and particularly when you're in a small community and you don't have much help with the city and things like that, that it's hard to put it together and meet the criteria that you need to meet. Who has been helping with some of the smaller, like Fitzgerald? I'm really surprised about that and really happy about that. But then Bainbridge being such a great example of success, is it a one-year thing that they can put together? Is it a few months? Is it who helps them put it together and things like that?
Sure. There are a number of different ways that this has been tackled and can be tackled. With some of the communities that have been designated, they are Main Street communities, so they've got a Main Street director, and that's the person who's been the champion and led the efforts. We've got some who it's been the Chamber of Commerce in the community who has taken the lead in that. There have been other communities that their regional commissions have been an instrumental player in them developing the application, helping with the market analysis, the plan that has been created. So I wouldn't say there's a one-size-fits-all, but each community has pulled together a team, and that team could be any of those entities that we've talked about. It could be downtown merchants, it could be elected officials, it could be whomever. But each of the communities does have a team that they pull together, and in order for this to be successful, it can't be on the shoulders of one person. And I think that's kind of where you're going with that question. If the point person for that community leaves tomorrow and takes a job somewhere else, we didn't want that void. So we required these communities to make sure that there was a team behind them, and we offer training for the team at the beginning of the year in which they've been designated. We have ongoing trainings that we are providing for each subsequent year. For the 2018 communities, they had an original, I'm going to call it an orientation, but we also at the beginning of 2019 had ongoing training that's being made available to them as well.
So this is a pretty long process, though, to get approved.
To get approved, it really can be fairly simple. It depends on what you have already in place. If you've got a plan for your downtown area, it makes it a lot simpler. We're not asking them to come in with binders full of information. We put together some criteria that we expect to be the bones of that plan. And that plan is going to talk about the history. It's going to talk about the opportunities. It's going to talk about your infrastructure. It's going to talk about traffic patterns. It's going to talk about everything that comes into play for your downtown area and how and why the elements that are lacking in your community are going to be enhanced with this incentive that's available. But it could be done in a matter of months if people are preparing.
One last comment. Would you please make a point to put all legislators in each district on this schedule to let them know when you're going to be in their district? Because so many times things like this is going on and we never know it. And obviously the cities would know it, but we may not be aware of it, and we certainly would like to know ahead of time so we can help promote it. But thank you. Somebody else got questions? Who's next? Representative McLean?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and also thank you very much too. I enjoy the tax credits because I think it always helps. But the local, now were these local jobs? I'm just trying to just get an understanding of the jobs that has to be created. Were they local jobs, or were they companies coming in and bringing their own work crews to do all the work there?
It could be either, technically, depending on what that district looks like. But what we typically see is restaurants that are expanding. We'll see a dance studio that's going into a downtown area that's going to bring families in there after school, and that's going to have a spillover effect. We're going to see retailers that are typically earning the credits in the downtown area. So it's across the board. If, for instance, and the way the legislation was written, in a lot of downtowns, you'll have your core downtown square, and immediately behind it, you're going to have an industrial park. That could, if the circumstances were right, be included within their zone, and they would have the opportunity to take advantage of that for some kind of manufacturer. So I would say both of the scenarios you posed could be possible, but really it's getting to these jobs have to be within the state of Georgia, within the community in which this zone is designated.
Thank you.
And Representative Bazemore. Who? Was that? Oh, Dukes. I'm sorry, Representative Dukes. No, Dukes is next. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Okay, very good. I'll let you take charge.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for your presentation. Quick question, and I apologize for my lateness, but you may have said this. Your presentation, was it a handout that you handed us, or can you get the information to
I
us,
will
please?
absolutely get that to you.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Yes, ma'am.
I appreciate you saying that because I've been taking notes here and there's no way I can keep up. So thank you. Thank you very much.
For the handout.
I gave up about halfway through. Representative Dukes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My question was also sort of like Representative Bazemore, because what you're actually speaking towards is enterprise zones, and I know we passed the small towns tax credit. Is that what you're speaking towards here, or?
Initially, that was strictly the rural zone program. We're going to get into opportunity zones. We're going to get into the state small business credit initiative. We're going to get into enterprise zones briefly at the end, but
We're trying to stick specifically with each zone as we go through.
Okay,
And so,
all right.
And so you'll have questions, I know, as we get into the next one.
Absolutely.
All right, we'll move on to the next one then, if you would.
the next one that I want to go to is one that has generated lots of conversation and, quite honestly, lots of confusion across the state. This is opportunity zones, and the state has had a state opportunity zone program for quite some time. In December of 2017, Congress passed a new program signed by the president that created a federal opportunity zone program. They don't act anything alike. So that's created some of the confusion. People think the benefits under one program are tied to the other, and we've had to do a lot of educating across the state, and it's something that I want to kind of share the distinctions between the two, and hopefully this will help. The fact that they are so different is going to be helpful, I think, as we talk through it. The state opportunity zone program, let's look at the one that's been on the ground here in the state for quite some time. It allows tax credits to businesses that are creating jobs within the communities across the state. So within the state program, it is tax credits. These have to be full-time jobs. A minute ago under rural zones, I was talking about full-time equivalents. These are full-time jobs, at least 35 hours a week. And health insurance must be offered to the employees. It does not have to be paid by the employer, but it has to be made available. That's a statutory requirement under the tax credit program. The average wages must be above the lowest county's wage in the state. So that's a floor that all of the jobs must exceed in order to qualify. And the credit is against, it can go up to 100% of the corporate income tax liability, and it can go against the withholdings in certain circumstances if the proper steps are taken. So on the state side, we've got these $3,500 a year tax credits per job. They're available to new or expanding businesses across the state, so it doesn't matter. It's not just an incentive to recruit somebody to the state. If you've got somebody that's in the community that's expanding, that's absolutely encouraged under the program. Within the state Opportunity Zone program, there are some requirements that have to be met in order to get that area designated. This is just to clear the bar to enter the game. You have to have a census block group with 15% or greater poverty. And you also have to have either an enterprise zone or this is contained within an urban redevelopment plan. So we've got multiple tools that get layered together before you can apply to be an opportunity zone. And the opportunity zones are evaluated again by the commissioners of community affairs and economic development, so that we've got both of the entities that are looking at this and making those designations. These designations last for 10 years. And when the 10-year period rolls off, there are a couple of things that could happen. You could have seen tremendous opportunity that has occurred over the last 10 years that's revitalized the area. There's no need for it to be continued in the future. Under certain circumstances, there's the potential for these opportunity zones to be renewed for a subsequent period. Again, we're looking at the current conditions. It's not as if, oh, you got it 10 years ago, it's going to be continued automatically. We'll look at the factors and see what's going on within that area before a determination is made, whether that zone gets to continue in the future. So on the state side, we have a number of communities, and we've got a number of zones that are going to be rolling off in the near future. Probably a big glut of those are going to roll off in the next 18 to 24 months. And I think a good bit of it goes to timing. If you go back 10 years from that, where were we? We were in the throes of a recession, depression, whichever term you want to use, and a lot of communities were struggling for tools and opportunities in which they were able to showcase and say, hey, here's something. If you can come and expand into our community, or if you're already here in our community, you can expand there. So I think the timing of when those came on was a big deal in us having a large number that are going to be rolling off in the near future. But these opportunity zones are a great tool that communities can use for revitalization.
When you speak of opportunity zone in a blighted area, you talk about residentially or commercial buildings, or does it matter, or both?
We're really looking at the commercial industrial areas because the job creation is what the benefit is going to provide for. There's not really a benefit to designating a residential area because the jobs have to be there in order to claim the credit. So what we really are looking for is those commercial and industrial areas.
And so this would be, I'm assuming, mainly where businesses have shut down over the years. Is that?
It
an
could
example?
be. I wouldn't say that necessarily is the case. You do have to, over time, yes. I wouldn't say that it necessarily has to be immediate. It could be something that dates back to the 50s or the 60s or the 70s. But it's not for greenfield development. It's really to revitalize those areas. So actually, I will say yes. It's going to have been where businesses were at some point in time, but it doesn't have to be the immediate past.
Representative Rogers.
Yes, sir. We keep talking about blight. Okay. Obviously, it's something on everybody's mind. We're doing this with the House Rural Development Council also. Are you familiar with that
Yes,
at
sir,
all?
I am.
Okay. You want to address that? I mean, it's my understanding that what we're doing is we're looking at the possibility of some grants, $2,500 to $5,000 with certain conditions. Are you guys going to be administering that?
If it passes in the form that I expect it to be, yes, sir,
I think
we
it'll
would be.
probably pass in that form, but I'm just speculating. But you want to talk about that for a second, or is that premature?
I really think it's a little premature, but what I understand,
If it passes,
if it passes in the concept that I understand,
if it passes the House, passes the Senate, and the governor puts his name on it, where do you see it going from there?
What we're anticipating is communities of 2,500 or less and grants in the less than $5,000 range, and this would be for communities to kind of clean up the blighting influences that are there, and that could take a couple of forms. I think the idea behind this came from something that the city of Houston did, and we've had conversation with the city of Houston and tried to get the understanding of what they did and why they did it. I think there are opportunities for other communities to take it in a slightly different path, and I wouldn't want to tie anybody's hands at this point. But what we would do is we would, if this passes and gets implemented and DCA is administering this program, what we would do is we would put together some program rules of what we were going to look for, how we were going to do it, publicize those, get word out throughout the state through a series probably of webinars, things that we can put online that people can read, things that you don't have to physically go to a meeting necessarily, blast emails, a lot of electronic communication, and have an application cycle and then evaluate the application subsequent to that.
Would it be fair to say that it's a great opportunity possibly to maybe motivate some people? You know, you're not talking about that much money. You're talking about $2,500 to $5,000, and what it could possibly do to bring community awareness to the problem and get people involved? Do you think that's where we could go with it?
I think it would have to come from that vantage point. I think you've got to have a successful program like that. Again, like the other programs we've talked about, it can't rest on one person's shoulders. It's got to have community support.
Community buy-in.
Yes.
Great, thank you.
Good point. Question, who actually does the designation and how do you get the designation done?
You're talking about the opportunity zones?
Yes. Mhm.
That is going to be, the state opportunity zone designations are going to be jointly made by the Commissioners of Community Affairs and Economic Development.
And so you just give them a call and say, look, come look at this area? I mean, or do you just know with looking at a map? Do you do your own research, or how do we get there?
There's an application process, and communities will apply. And what will happen when an application comes in, we will have one of our team members. We've got 12 regional reps that are scattered across the state. And the first line of defense for us is that person's going to give an analysis of what's been submitted. We also have additional staff that are going to go and look at this and evaluate what's on paper and what they see visually whenever they go in the community. And then it's going to be vetted through staff at Department of Community Affairs, and then a joint meeting between the two commissioners before a designation is made. It's not a willy-nilly process. It's very thought out.
Okay. Any other questions on the opportunity zone? State opportunity zone. You haven't gone into federal yet, have you?
No, sir, not yet.
All right, let's go.
Let's go. All right, when we go over to the Federal Opportunity Zone program, let me start by giving a little bit of background here. There were 1,137 eligible census tracts in the state. That's not the entirety of the census tracts, but those were just the ones that qualified. The way the legislation was passed in Congress was that states could have designated by Treasury up to 25% of the eligible census tracts. So you take the 1137 and divide it by 4, and you get a rounded up number of 260. The 260 census tracts were designated across the state, both urban and rural, and within these census tracts, the ability to attract investment is enhanced. And there are no tax credits associated with this. That's one of the earlier common confusion points. But what happens is folks that have unrealized capital gains have the ability to invest in what is called an opportunity fund. The opportunity fund must then invest no less than 90% of those dollars that have been invested in them within designated opportunity zones. Gets a little confusing there, but the funds have the dollars have to go into an opportunity fund. The opportunity fund has to invest in the opportunity zone, and the tax benefits are greater the longer you stay in that area. It can be as short as 5 years, but there's a 5-year, a 7-year, and a 10-year threshold whereby the tax benefits to the investor get greater. So it basically boils down to being a tool so that businesses, developers, whomever, have the opportunity to receive capital to do activities in census tracts that have higher poverty and lower income thresholds. And what we have come to find out is probably some of the most common activities that we're going to see nationwide through this are going to be affordable housing initiatives. We're going to be able to see some real estate acquisition and development, and there is the opportunity for individual businesses, primarily larger scale businesses, I think, that's again speculation, have the opportunity to receive some capital to undertake projects within these designated census tracts, 260 within the state of Georgia. So that is the high level. I'll dive down wherever folks may want to go in regards to the federal program.
Well, first off, do you have available maps of those areas?
Yes, sir. On DCA's website, if you go to, if you Google DCA Map Atlas, you will find a Federal Opportunity Zone map. We've got that available. It's interactive. You can zoom in and out, see exactly where these census tracts lie. So short answer is yes, sir, we do. I'll make sure that gets included in what I send you. And
the DCA was involved in selecting these 250 50 sites?
DCA worked with Department of Economic Development, the governor's office, and some communities across the state through
But did not work with any state legislators or senators?
that may be an accurate statement. I won't definitively say we did not work with any.
It came as a surprise package to me. I'll just say that.
This came as a surprise package to us in the first place. When this was passed, the zones had to be submitted to Treasury within 90 days of the passage of the act. So people were still trying to figure out what we were talking about through the process of this. It was passed in December and late March. These had to be submitted to Treasury for approval. What we did was we let the data drive where these zones went. Eligible census tracts had a poverty level of 20%, so we started dialing that up and let the data eliminate up to about 75% of those. Let the data drive the process.
Representative McLean, question?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess, are there any overlapping of the zones?
I can't tell you exactly where, but yes, sir, there could be overlap with federal and state opportunity zones. So they would have access to the capital utilizing the federal opportunity zone, opportunity fund process. There could be state credits that are available for businesses creating jobs in those same areas.
I just kind of think it would be, if we spread it out a little bit more, when any overlap, and we could help more. But that's not my call.
And these this designation process, like I referenced just a moment ago, it was the data driving the process. It wasn't, okay, who's got an opportunity zone, we'll avoid that or we'll go there. That was not part of the conversation.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Caldwell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you very much for your time today.
Yes, sir.
I was aware of the state economic opportunity zones. I wasn't aware of the federal, so this is really helpful. You mentioned the opportunity funds. Who is managing those? How do those get established? What does that process look like?
That process is a little bit nebulous.
Okay.
These
like it already.
These opportunity funds could be self-certified.
Okay.
So this is dealing
what I
with
was wondering.
Treasury and the IRS. That there's no touch with the state necessarily.
So I, as an individual who have unrealized capital gains, could go self-establish an opportunity fund and then invest it in these census tracts?
My limited knowledge of IRS rules and such, I think you can.
I didn't think there was anything nebulous about that.
Okay,
Treasury's
that's-
involved too.
That was exactly my
Sure.
question. Thank you.
And just as an aside on the federal opportunity zones, we think this is a program that is going to need a little bit of a nudge at the state level in order to maximize the benefit. If left alone, it may succeed, but we want to make sure that we give it every opportunity possible. Back in late 2018, DCA and Department of Economic Development put together a workshop in Atlanta so that folks could come in and hear about this. We brought in experts, some who were involved in the crafting of the bill at the federal level, others who have basically been brains behind some of the mechanics that operate within the Federal Opportunity Zone program. And we held that one-day event. Coming up on March 1st, we are going to have another event in Albany. The information is just about to go out in regards to that. But it's more of a practical, as a community, what can we do, what should we do in order to make sure that we have the opportunity to realize some of these opportunity funds within our community. What we are looking to do is empower the communities with the knowledge that they need, effectively put together a community prospectus. What are you trying to achieve? What's it going to take to achieve that? And how are you going to partner with someone providing some financing in order to achieve this? If a community can put together that in a concise, clear format, I think it's going to be far easier for them to sell that idea to an investor than it would be if you don't have those thoughts put together. Some communities have already put together a community prospectus. Others have not. So it's a matter of trying to give everyone the knowledge, the information that they could use in order to maximize the benefit under
You guys
this.
have a conference scheduled in Albany, right? To kind of get the word out.
Yes, sir. March 1st.
Might need to go there.
And this is on the federal one you talking about?
This is on the federal one, yes. We're trying to convene those knowledgeable persons to share that knowledge and kind of prime the pump so that communities can do what they are able to do.
Without us having a map in front of us, can you tell me where you see these locations of federal opportunity zones? Are more in the rural area? They're more in, or some in every county, or how did?
There are 260.
260,
So
okay.
the numbers don't allow for that many all across the board. As we started dialing it up, to be perfectly honest, the higher poverty areas were the urban areas and more south. I would say I-20 south within the state. There were some, but there were not. The least concentration would have been in North Georgia. The urban areas were probably about 40% of those designated areas, maybe just a little bit north of that, and the balance would have primarily been between I-20 and the Florida border.
And this was criteria that was set up by the federal government.
Yes, sir. They set up the criteria for the eligible census tracts, and then the poverty rate is the measure that was used to kind of identify those that were going to be submitted to Treasury for designation.
Has anybody made use of any of this federal opportunity zones at this point?
Anecdotally, I have heard that folks are. I have not seen anything specific about it, so I would be reluctant to try to weigh in, but it's my understanding that folks have started that process and started utilizing it.
Okay. Representative Dukes, question?
No, he answered it.
Okay, very good. Okay, you got one more zone, is that right? Or two?
I've got the State Small Business Credit Initiative
Yeah.
and the enterprise zones.
Okay.
If we go back to 2010, again, I referenced this a short while ago. We were in the throes of an economic downturn, and Congress, again, acted, and they passed the Small Business and Jobs Act of 2010. As a part of that, we created a program through Treasury, which was called the State Small Business Credit Initiative. And through this, the state of Georgia had about $50 million to deploy. And within 5 years, we deployed all of those funds to businesses to provide them access to capital. And these were for small businesses to get access to capital. When we deployed that $48 to $50 million, the oversight from Treasury went away. So we deployed the funds. As it comes back, we don't have the federal hoops to jump through. So it's a much easier to administer program now that we are free of the federal requirements. What we have done is we have two programs that are in place at this point in time. We started with 4 as things went along. We came out from under Treasury oversight. We saw these are the two that are really getting good bang for the buck. We have a loan guarantee program whereby we guarantee up to 50% of a $400,000 loan. That's going to produce lower risk for your lending institutions. It's going to allow them to do some things that might not fit nicely and neatly within their traditional lending boxes. So the loan guarantee program is one that is definitely popular among lenders as well as businesses that are seeking the access to the capital. The second program is a loan participation program whereby we are in a second position with a portion of a loan here. We will participate up to 25%, and we will participate up to $250,000 there.
I must have missed something. I was still on the 400,000, and now
Okay.
you moving on to
On the loan guarantee program,
Okay.
it's 50% of $400,000.
right,
50% of whatever the loan is, up to $400,000 is what we will guarantee.
right.
On the participation, where we actually are a lender in the process, we will participate up to 25%, and $250,000 is what we will participate at. This is a program where we are not in competition with the banking community. They have to be a partner in this process. So every single deal is underwritten by the bank. It's a subordinated lending program where they get to control all of that. We come in on the back end. Of course, we do our own evaluation of the loan to make sure it's above board and looks good. But we streamline the procedures. We make sure that what we have in place is going to allow them to deploy the funds as quickly as possible. It's faster than a number of other programs, federal programs that are out there, somewhat easier to work with. So the business community and the banking community have both been very receptive to this. We've loaned out or guaranteed somewhere north of $60 million as funds have come back in and recycled through. Leveraged probably about $350 million through the process. Numerous jobs have been created as a result of this. And I think one of the other things that's favorable to banks is there is the potential for their Community Reinvestment Act funds to parallel with this. So they've got a lot of benefit that could be realized for them. So this is yet another program that we have trying to get access to capital for small businesses across the state.
Just as a comment, I remember when this first came out. It's been, what, 5 years ago now?
2012 was when we initially rolled it out.
Longer than I thought. But I remember it was announced in Atlanta at a high-rise hotel. And I happened to be in Atlanta, and I went there for the announcement, and I was shocked to find out the program was set up for rural Georgia. And yet an announcement was made here, and and getting the word out to rural Georgia was a different issue. And of course, I know many people did, probably besides me, but I had events in my area inviting people to come and ran ads in the paper and things like that, and we had a great turnout.
Yes.
And this was an unbelievable program, and I think it's one of the best that Georgia's ever had to help people start their businesses or grow their businesses or grow inventory. And it was based on the fact that we were in a recession at the time, or
Absolutely.
depression, whatever you want to call it. But the biggest problem was that we couldn't get local rural banks to participate. And over the years now, since you've got control now and the federal government's kind of out of it, you've made it much easier now for local small banks to get involved. And this has been just an unbelievable program. The problem is now is that most of the money's gone, and so it's harder to get money now than it used to be.
Sure.
And but how often is this going to turn over, and how much is available on an annual basis, I guess is the question.
We have several $1 million that are available right now between the two programs. And the rate at which it turns over is going to be somewhat dependent upon the loan terms that are established for each individual loan. We will continually have that churn going where funds come in, funds go out, funds come in, funds go out. On the guarantee side, whenever a loan is satisfied, that just frees up additional capital that we can use. What we will continue to do, we've done this, and we continue to do it, we will keep doing it, is to engage with local bankers, whoever they are, wherever they are. We've got staff that will go out, we'll talk with them. We love talking to groups of people because it makes it easier to get multiple banks, or if you've got a larger bank, multiple people from within that lending institution together so that all of the parties can be aware of what the opportunities are. But we will make that available to a lender so that other parts of the state can get access to this.
Is it still set aside for rural?
It's for wherever the opportunity comes from.
The
But
question- the
the
answer is no, though.
majority, the answer is no, but the majority of the loans
Yeah.
are absolutely in rural Georgia.
Well, I'm just going to make a comment, and I'm going to let Vice Chair ask a question, but I guess my concern is that because obviously there's more applications that would be coming from outside of rural Georgia, that the money would be used up and then not be as much or any available for the rural areas, even though the rurals don't have that many applications for it. I at least wish that rural Georgia would see a first opportunity, because I'm worried that the funds will continue to go down and it won't be available when somebody in rural Georgia does come up. Now, the banks, again, your department's been great, DCA's been great. I've had them down to meet with my banks 3 and 4 times before they finally convinced them to get on board. And actually in my county, we've got 3 banks, and one has signed on about 2 years ago, and they've just done phenomenal. And and it's a great program, and we need to get more people on it, make more people aware of it. But I do know that also the dollars available for one time have come down based on the fact that a lot of money is now being loaned out.
Sure.
So, but who made the decision that it was not just rural Georgia? After the feds were out of the program, then DCA decided to expand it.
It has been available to the entire state throughout the duration of the program.
Well, and originally they said it was set aside for rural Georgia. I mean, I remember that specifically. So you saying that wasn't the case originally? It's just my mistake. I make mistakes sometimes.
It's my understanding that it was available statewide, just looking at the map and seeing where loans have been made. But it would be surprising to know that the majority of the applications we get are from rural Georgia.
Okay. The other thing I asked the day that it was introduced was, does this include farmers? And they said, absolutely. Are you aware of any farmers that's ever?
Yes, and I will say I don't know exactly how many or what concentration of the assets are going to be in an agricultural operation, but yes,
Okay.
we've had some fairly recently in the agricultural sector.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Vice Chair.
Yeah, I want to fall back on the first program where the federal money came in and then you guys were responsible for it and you take over and you're actually lending the money. Small businesses apply, or a broker applies for a small business, or however the situation works. What type of safeguards do you do to investigate and make certain that there's collateral or whatever, and what kind of potential is there for fraud, and what do your defaults look like on that right now?
The defaults are extremely low. So first off, the bank is doing the initial underwriting for that. We've got a credit team in-house that goes back behind the lender and evaluates it. The vast majority of the time, we're going to find that the lender is doing everything as they should because their assets are right there. There have been times where our folks have come back behind underwriting and said, this just doesn't work. So we do have the in-house team that's looking at every single application that comes in. We've got a very, very low default rate.
Has that always been that way since the history of it?
Yes, sir. We've never seen a large spike as far as getting out of low single-digit default rate there.
Okay.
And I would have to make a comment that this process now has become by far the easiest of anything I've ever seen. A lot of
Thank you.
people associate it with SBA, which has nothing to do with SBA, and it's a great program, and I encourage you to use it.
Thank you for
Representative
those
Dukes?
kind words.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. What are your eligible activities?
It's going to depend on which of the two programs, but really any fixed asset here is going to be available. Within certain conditions, you've got working capital that could be a part of it. We're not doing refinance, but really your assets, your FFE, those types of
Furniture,
things.
fixture, and equipment.
Mhm.
You said working capital under certain constraints. What are the constraints for working capital?
It's going to depend on exactly what that business looks like. I would much rather the banking experts answer the specific questions on that, and I'll be happy to put them in touch with you directly. But it sounds like you've got somebody in mind there that might
Absolutely.
benefit from the program.
Legislators can't apply.
I don't know that that's ever come up.
Just asking, one other thing. Well, I heard him.
I think if you have a business and you're a legislator, you're not applying as a legislator, you're applying.
That's a business, yeah. Not working capital come to stay in Atlanta for the session, but
That's called fundraising.
the other thing, what are the terms?
Those are going to be established by the bank. The lender is going to establish those terms.
But you all are in the second position, so I would think that you all would have your terms, or because basically the bank, if you're in the second position, you're in a different spot.
Sure. That's going to vary.
Vary. Based on
all the factors.
You
I wanna-
sound just like-
It's
I
going to
understand,
be the
yeah.
same thing as what a bank would do.
Let me interject here a minute.
Capital.
Again, since the very first day, this has been an exciting program. I've worked it hard and actually outside of my district, helping other people. And matter of fact, I had a company set up to come to Eastman, Georgia, and I helped them get $500,000 at the time. Now it's 400, and then they went somewhere else and set up the company.
money.
But anyway, but they're doing well. They're doing well. But basically, the bank looks at it like a normal loan, and if they're willing to make the loan, the state basically says, unless there's something that really stands out wild, says, okay, we'll sign on. And that's about the end of it. That's pretty simple, but
That's a
kinda what it is.
simplistic version, but yes, sir.
And the bank has no recourse. I mean, the state has no recourse. All the recourse and all the assets, if it's faltered, goes to the bank and not to the state, unless there's leftovers. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
It's a good program. It really is. But there again, I have taken people to the bank that I thought would be a great loan, and the bank wouldn't make it, even
Right.
though the state was going to be a part of it. They just don't always do it. But matter of fact, one individual, I remember they asked for him to sign a personal guarantee, and he wouldn't do it. The bank said, then we're not doing it. So banks, the banks are still pretty strict about how they make the loans. Okay, we got one more.
Yes, sir.
Okay, go
We
ahead.
doing okay on time?
Yes, sir. Perfect.
Enterprise zones. This is something that touches DCA, but we don't administer. And enterprise zones are a tool that are available to cities and counties across the state to promote revitalization. And revitalization is the key there. It encourages businesses to invest or reinvest within a certain area. But there are some benefits that could occur within an enterprise zone. A couple of things that are at play here. One is a property tax exemption. One could be an abatement of occupational tax, regulatory fees, your inspection fees, things of that nature. And you could also have a situation where certain regulations, local regulations, ordinances, your development regulations, et cetera, could be modified by the local government within this enterprise zone. This is done by a local ordinance. This is something that's entirely in the hands of the local governing body. What I will say is sales tax is not one of those things that can be exempted through this process, but the ordinance is going to dictate exactly what could be done in that jurisdiction. They have the latitude to use any of the tools that are possible within the law in order to encourage that redevelopment. There are 5 criteria, and in order to qualify within an enterprise zone, you have to meet at least 3 of the 5. And simplistically, I'm going to say them as pervasive poverty, unemployment significantly above the state average, general distress, underdevelopment, and general blight. If you hit 3 of those 5 criteria, you can designate the area as an enterprise zone. Where does DCA come into this? The statute requires that whenever you, as a community, adopt the enterprise zone ordinance, you submit that to DCA. We're supposed to be the repository of that information, but it's not something that we administer through the process. This is a locally driven designation, and it's available to communities that meet 3 out of those 5 criteria within the area that they're seeking to have designated.
Is that county and city, or county
Yes, sir.
or city?
Either or. And it is possible for a joint enterprise zone to be created by city and county if they so chose.
And I may have missed it, but what would be the benefits of doing that?
The benefits are going to be for a business type activity to occur in there. The reduction in taxes or fees or modification of the development guidelines.
State, federal taxes, local taxes?
It's local ad valorem tax that is going to be exempted there. And then your local occupation tax, your fees, your inspection fees, et cetera, which would be at the local level. Local tools to encourage that redevelopment.
But nothing state or federal?
I don't believe that there's anything state that is exempted in that, but I will verify that.
But the
and
reason
get
I
back
say
to
that
you.
is because obviously in rural Georgia and our condition in most rural Georgia
Sure.
areas, that we can't afford to give anything
Right.
away. And so I didn't know if it was, that would not be something that we would utilize unless there was some state or federal reasons to use it. Any other questions?
Thank you.
I have really enjoyed it, and I've learned a lot.
Good.
I appreciate
Thank
it,
you.
Mr. Haywood,
Absolutely.
and I appreciate your department letting you come over. And next week, for the committee's sake, we've, DCA has got like 63 programs, and today we covered 4 or 5, I think, and next week we'll be putting out something as to what other parts of DCA that we want to dive into. We're going to be looking at low-income housing, and actually, I don't remember now, but 2 or 3. And again, we'll always try to keep it within an hour. We'll break them down and individually. And if any of the members of the committee, if you got an idea of something that you particularly want to know about, then let me know and we'll put it on the list. And thank you so much for
You're
coming.
so
And tell
welcome.
the commissioner we appreciate him letting you come
Will
over.
do.
And see him again later on.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Thank you, sir.
A motion to adjourn? Yeah, all right. First and second, adjourn. Thank you, guys.